Vibe coding is growing in Silicon Valley.
Vibe coding.
Vibe coding.
Vibe coding.
Been vibe coding.
Vibe coding is the future.
Vibe coding.
Vibe coding. Seems like everyone's favorite buzzword, but I'm not necessarily sure it really means anything. On one hand, it's the thing that we expect to do when we use some AI code gen tool and spit out a bunch of code and never look at it and make features. But on the other hand, there's a bunch of books coming out on how to be a good vibe coding engineer. And I'm not sure that these definitions make sense at all anymore. Vibe coding is a cool concept that started when Karpathy made a post about how he's thinking about code and not thinking about code, more importantly. But now, since the term is so cool, I feel like it's being used in places that make no sense at all. I felt this way for a while, but I started feeling it much more strongly when Simon Willison made this post. If you're not already reading Simon's blog, I highly recommend it, not just because he covered my snitch bench thing recently, but because he's the creator of Django and he's quickly become one of my favorite people in the AI world. He came in late, similar to me, not as late as me at all, but came in somewhat late, quickly established a awesome spot being like realistic, but also excited about what these things can do. One of the more reasonable AI bros by far. And this post hit me hard because it's a thing I've already felt that he put really simply. And I want to dig in a lot further here because I, at this point, don't even know if vibe coding is a real thing. So before we can dive into what the hell vibe coding is, we have some bills to pay. So quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll get started. I need to be honest with you guys. I'm scared for people trying to learn today, be it a new developer learning from scratch or an experienced developer trying to pick up a new tool or part of the stack. Making sure you find reliable resources that aren't some AI hallucinated slop is super difficult. If you don't know what you're doing yet, making sure you're learning from the right people is really hard. And that's why I'm hyped about today's sponsor, Front-End Masters. You've been around for a while, you know how skeptical I am of courses. I'm sure you know the old phrase, those who do, do, and those who can't do, teach. But what if you put together a set of courses that were made exclusively by people who are already doing? And what if their jobs and companies were so relevant that you would put their names right underneath the name of the instructor? That's what you get with these guys, because Richard Feldman built an IDE from scratch in Rust. Or Melky, who is still somehow employed at Twitch. Okay, joking, Melky's a good friend. He knows his stuff really well, and you've probably seen his videos too. If you want to learn Golang, there are a few better places to go than him. Or John Cooperman is one of the most legendary people in the TypeScript and web dev world, working over at Bloomberg. You got Primogen here, who used to work at Hulu or something, I don't remember. You got Katie, who's one of the smartest people in the React Native community. Seeing her in here actually gets me really hyped. I kind of want to go through those courses myself once we start building the T3 chat app. If you haven't already made the plunge and you have a job, there's a good chance your company will let you spend the education budget on Front-End Masters. Either way, if you use my link, you'll get 25% off. So check them out today at soidev.link/masters. So as Simon puts it in this post, 2 publishers and 3 authors failed to understand what vibe coding means. Vibe coding does not mean using AI tools to help write code. When you are inside of Cursor and you click Command K and tell it to do something and it does it, or you tab complete as you're making changes, none of that is vibe coding. Those are using AI tools to assist your development process. Vibe coding is when you Command I and go in here and also close all of the files and never look at the code. I would go as far as making the argument that you can't vibe code in Cursor because once it starts making the changes, you have to look at the code. It always does. Whereas on a platform like Lovable, which if I recall, did not initially even have a code tab when it shipped. It was just the view of the thing that it was building. That's vibe coding. When you're using AI to generate changes to a thing or even generate it from scratch, not even looking at the code, just running the thing. And if it does get an error, you copy paste the error into the chat and say, fix it. Give it no additional context and trust the AI to vibe it out and make it happen. That's vibe coding. I'd make the argument that coding and vibe coding are almost like opposites. They are diametrically opposed. You are either coding or you are vibe coding. You can assist the coding process with AI, but vibe coding is replacing the coding process. It is an alternative to coding. As we mentioned before, the term was coined by Karpathy at the beginning of 2025, back in February. A lot of people asked if T3 chat was vibe coded. Vibe coding wasn't a thing when T3 chat was built. T3 chat came out a few weeks before the word vibe coding existed. As Karpathy puts it, there's a new kind of coding that I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. It's possible because the LLMs, like Cursor Composer with Sonnet, are getting too good. Also, I just talked to Composer with Super Whisper, so I barely even touched the keyboard. I ask for the dumbest things, like decrease the padding on the sidebar by half, because I'm too lazy to find it. I accept all always. I don't read the diffs anymore. When I get error messages, I just copy paste them in with no comment. Usually that fixes it. The code grows beyond my usual comprehension. I'd have to really read through it for a while. Sometimes the LLMs can't fix a bug, so I just work around it or ask for random changes until it goes away. It's not too bad for a throwaway weekend project, but still quite amusing. I'm building a project or a web app, but I'm not really coding. I just see stuff, say stuff, run stuff, copy paste stuff. It mostly works. There are a couple key points here that I would argue are key to the definition of vibe coding. Otherwise, the term is useless. So by Karpathy's definition, not reading diffs is key. Not too bad for throwaway weekend projects. The exact quote I think is important to put in here is, I'm building a project or web app, but it's not really coding. That is really key here. And the general concept of giving in to the vibes and giving up on the code. These are the key pieces, in my mind, to what makes vibe coding. While he does use cursor for it, he emphasizes that he doesn't look at any of the code. He even says that he forgets the code exists. A lot of ways you can do that. You can hide it in the UI. You can refuse to read it when it comes up. You can intentionally glaze over it when you're scrolling past it. But not reading diffs, focusing on throwaway projects and one-off things that don't have to be maintained, having more code than you would ever comprehend or care to go through, much less write yourself. All of these things are what makes vibe coding vibe coding. And as Simon puts in this other really good blog post, I'm concerned the definition is already escaping its original intent. I'm seeing people apply the term vibe coding to all forms of code written with the assistance of AI. I think that both dilutes the term and gives a false impression of what's possible with responsible AI-assisted programming. Vibe coding is not the same thing as writing code with the help of LLMs. Oh, look at that, even bolded things here. Forget the code even exists. It's not too bad for throwaway projects, but it is quite amusing. And similar to me, Simon thinks that this definition is really good. It is very useful as a term to distinguish between the different types of AI coding tools. We have things like tab complete, which used to be the Copilot experience, but now Copilot is the most diluted term in the world, even more so than AI. So calling something Copilot-like means literally nothing. When you tell me something is Copilot-like, the immediate thought that comes to mind is the app that every time I turn on the desktop I film these videos on, automatically comes up in Windows with a new, unique error code every time it opens. That's what I think of when I hear Copilot-like. So that term is gone. We can't use that anymore. Tab complete is enough, I guess. It helps. And now I'm at the point where I refer to the specific key bindings when I try to describe a flow. The inline prompting in cursor, I just call Command K because that's the key combo you hit to do it. And there isn't a better like shorthand term for it. I guess like inline prompt editing, maybe, but I've never heard anyone say that. Then there's Command I, which has become the agentic AI code editing. I just call it Command I though, and a lot of other people do too. These different hotkeys might seem like a silly way to distinguish, but it's the easiest way to explain what thing you're talking about and what feature you're thinking about. And vibe coding is a very different thought. It's a different way of thinking about and framing these things. It's one where this isn't just for people who know how to write code to make their code writing more effective. This is for people who may or may not know how to write code that are choosing to not bother reading it. As Simon says, Karpathy is an extremely talented and experienced programmer. He has no need for AI assistance at all. Another important thing, you don't need to be a good or bad or non-programmer to vibe code. A great programmer can vibe code by not reading the code, and a bad programmer or non-programmer can vibe code because they can't do anything with the code part anyways. Karpathy is using LLMs like this because it's fun to try out wild new ideas, and the speed at which an LLM can produce code is an order of magnitude faster than even the most skilled human programmer. For low-stakes projects and prototypes, why not just let it rip? When I talk about vibe coding, I mean building software with an LLM without reviewing the code it writes. Huge. Really good key distinction here as well from Simon. We need terms to describe the different types of ways you can integrate AI into your coding process. But as soon as you're talking about what percentage of your code base is coded with AI, you're no longer vibe coding. Like if somebody says that their code base is 70% vibe coded, I don't know if I even believe them. I would say it's probably less because you look at the code, you see it when you make other changes to the code, you are paying some attention. And even when I vibe coded the snitch bench benchmark, I did not write a single line of code in one of the 2 giant files in that code base. But I did read a decent bit of it. Not a lot of it, but enough of it. I wouldn't call it vibe coding because I was paying attention to the code it wrote. I wasn't just paying attention to the outputs. I would argue that vibe coding is almost a ratio between how much are you paying attention to the code versus how much are you paying attention to the output, like product that comes out of the thing that you built. The ratio there, specifically the ratio on the code side being 0, where you're not looking at the code at all, that's what defines vibe coding. Also important to note that using LLMs for code responsibly is not vibe coding at all. Things like using CodeRabbit or Graphite's Diamond to review your code is very far from vibe coding. Things like using Command I and reading the diffs and rejecting the changes and asking it to do something differently. That's not vibe coding. Anytime you're in the code is not vibe coding. Somebody asked in chat, is this like saying you're not doing test-driven development if you don't have 100% test coverage? No. This is like saying you're not doing test-driven development if you're writing the code before you write the tests. This isn't about the percentage, but if the percentage is 100 or 0, it's usually a good indicator. The fact that people are calling any AI involvement in their code vibe coding makes the term go from an actual useful indicator of this specific thing to entirely useless to the point where it should be thrown out. I think we might even be over that line now, where I don't use the term often because everyone thinks of something different when I say vibe coding. Some people think that what I'm doing in Cursor is vibe coding. Some people think Lovable and Bolt are the ways that you vibe code. Some people think tab complete is vibe coding. I like having terms to distinguish between these things, both because I like talking about them and making content about them, but also because we need to understand these things with language, and the language we're using needs to be concrete and with definitions we agree on. And I'm doing my best to help us all agree on the definition here, especially because there are 2 books coming out that are not vibe coding. This one immediately contradicts itself. Vibe coding, building production-grade software with Gen AI, chat agents, and beyond. I'm not going to blame the authors because the authors probably didn't pick the title. The publisher did because they want to get on the hype bandwagon. They want to make something that people will buy. The issue is that this book probably isn't useful to people who are learning how to code and getting into building via vibe coding. So if a non-dev buys this because vibe coding is the thing they're getting into, and this book is written for real experienced programmers trying to use AI more, which is what it seems like with this title and subtitle, that is a super misleading thing. To use a test-driven development example again, imagine if I made a book titled Test-Driven Development, How to Build Type-Safe Side Projects Effectively with Tests. That's not what test-driven development is. The fact that you're saying side projects indicates that this isn't actually about test-driven development at all. You just want to show me how to add tests to a thing. Or even better example, test-driven development, how to strategically add tests to existing projects. That's not what TDD is. It's the opposite of what TDD is. Adding tests after means you're not driven by the tests. Test-driven development means that your development is driven by the tests. Vibe coding means that you are not reading the code. This frustrates me so much. Or vibe coding, the future of programming. Leverage your experience in the age of AI. Are you joking? And this one breaks me because I love Adi Osmani. He's one of my favorite people in the space. But we all know O'Reilly Media picked this title. I love this point from Simon as well. I wonder if this is a new record for the time that a term was coined to the first published books using the term entirely incorrectly. That is kind of crazy that in February, this term was coined, and 3 months later, we now have books being published that use it wrong. It's kind of nuts. Job of a dev is not just to churn out code and features. We need to create code that demonstrably works and can be understood by other humans and machines that will support continued development in the future. Again, like Simon's not some crazy diluted AI bro that thinks we're all going to get replaced with like random agents and shit. He wants good engineering and AI assistance to all happen because all of these things can be good. And vibe coding can be good too as a way to do things that matter less. As he says, we also need to read the code. My golden rule for production quality AI-assisted programming is that I won't commit any code to my repo if I couldn't explain exactly what it does to somebody else. I love this. Shout this from the mountaintops. Don't merge code that you don't understand. An LLM wrote the code for you, and you then reviewed it, tested it thoroughly, and made sure you could explain how it works to someone else. That's not vibe coding, it's software development. The usage of an LLM to support that activity is immaterial. Poof, bars. And the reason that both Simon and I are mad, as I've hinted at a bunch, is that we shouldn't lose track of what makes vibe coding special. Both because we need the term, but also because it enables a new type of building that wasn't really a thing before. A big part of why I made the T3 stack is it was too hard to glue all the parts together to make something simple quickly. And I used it to build a bunch of small, simple apps that solved real problems that I had. That was a skill that used to make me really unique. The fact that I could build a product in under a week that was actually useful to people was one of the big selling points of why you would bring me into your team or why you would listen to my takes on engineering. AI has made it so most programmers can do that, and even some non-programmers can too, depending on the thing that they're building. That is awesome. I don't feel like I am at a big loss now that everyone else can build something from scratch as fast as I used to do it 5 years ago. I think that's awesome. I love the fact that more people can vibe out a project. And honestly, the vibe coded stuff that they're building is probably similar quality of code to the first 2 versions of Pick thing that I threw together in a day or two, because I just wanted to make the thing work. And now most people can make the thing work relatively quickly. Going from the mindset of like building enterprise ready everything to making a thing useful as quickly as possible was something I was lucky enough to have happen early in my career. But even for me, it was a hard shift to like stop stuffing GraphQL into everything where it's not needed. Vibe coding is helping others experience that of like letting go and knowing something is not ideal, but not caring because you just want the thing to work. I'm not saying that my way of coding 5 years ago was vibe coding at all. It's not. But vibe coding is a path to a similar outcome, which I think is really cool. Another important point is that we shouldn't let vibe coding become this negative term, specifically associated with irresponsible AI-assisted programming. Like when people say, oh, that outage was probably because they vibe coded it. That's not right. It's both almost certainly not true, and even if it was, it's not a good way to use the term, because the point of it is that you're using it on low-stakes things that you're throwing together. It's giving everyone this ability to build something quicker, more effectively, by not caring about things they shouldn't care about. The same way that I love Vercel, because spinning everything up serverless means I get to stop thinking about a ton of different problems. Vibe coding lets you do that for the entire code base if it makes sense for the thing you're doing. Vercel doesn't make sense for every backend. Vibe coding doesn't make sense for every project. But where it does, it's really useful and powerful. You shouldn't need a computer science degree or programming bootcamp in order to get computers to do extremely specific tasks for you. If you need a calculator to keep track of a specific grind you are doing in World of Warcraft, or you need a dashboard to keep track of this weird collection of things that you have for your small consignment shop, you shouldn't have to force another tool not built for you to fit your needs, especially if you're not a developer. You should be able to make something that might not be perfect, it might not even be good, but it's good enough for you and your bespoke needs. That should be accessible to everybody. And that's what vibe coding is meant to do. And it's really cool. Even if right now, mostly actual developers are doing it, more and more non-devs are, and that is an awesome thing, both because they can solve real problems, but also they can start learning more about code and seeing that it's accessible to build these types of things. Vibe coding is a gateway to get people into creating software and as a way for people to solve a problem without thinking about the code. Those are 2 really powerful things that we will lose if we swap it out so this term is used for all AI coding or for bad AI coding. If vibe coding grants millions of new people the ability to build their own custom tools, I could not be happier about it. That is Simon's quote, and I fully agree. Some of these people will get bitten by the programming bug and go on to become proficient software devs. One of the biggest barriers to that profession is the incredibly steep learning curve, especially at the start. Vibe coding shaves that initial barrier down to almost flat. A thing I talk about a lot is time to smile. From the time somebody starts doing the thing to the time they smile for the first time, where it worked or it happened and they're excited about it. How long does it take to get over that? I am really lucky that I learned how to skateboard when I was younger, because it takes a long time to go from standing on a board for the first time to being proud of a thing you did. It takes months, if not years, to like land your first ollie. It took me 2 years to go from the ollie to the kickflip, and I learned a tray flip like a day or 2 later, which is a much harder trick. But that feeling, that vibe, so to speak, of I want to do this thing, to wow, I'm making progress. This feels like something I can do, because it's so hard to land that first ollie that the vast majority of people who try give up before they get there. It makes the end much more rewarding, but if you don't see the end, if you can't imagine what it will be like to be there, you'll never get there. It's the same reason there aren't many programmers, because it takes so long to go from reading this esoteric language with all these weird symbols you don't know to it doing the thing you want it to do. This is why I like tools like React and Next and StackBlitz and all the cool things that the React docs have done, because it lets somebody go from, I want to figure out code, to I made this change and this thing happened and I feel like I'm starting to understand it. And then they smile because they're making progress and they can feel it. Vibe coding gets you that first smile so much faster. It makes you feel like you can do it. And if you then run into a bug that makes life way harder and you have to go dive in and fix it, at least you have a path there. You don't have to rely on some smarter person to hold your hand through it like I and many other devs did. You don't have to go spend a bunch of money on a college that doesn't even teach you how to do these things in the first place. You start by letting go, just trying to make the thing happen, and then ride the wave from there. I would expect there to be a ton of incredibly talented devs that get in through this. And I am excited to see where they go. With all that said, should probably talk about when is it okay to vibe code. If you're an experienced engineer, this is likely obvious to you already, so I'm writing this section for people who are just getting started. Projects should be low stakes. Think about how much harm the code you're writing could cause if it has bugs or vulnerabilities. Could someone be harmed, damaged reputation, lost money, or something worse? Particularly important if you plan on building software that will be used by other people. That's a big detail there. If you're building things that are just for yourself, who cares? Like when I built the first 2 versions of PicThing, they were just for me. They were poorly architected, tons of bad decisions. I didn't have to worry about other engineers contributing, so I didn't care. I didn't have to worry about other people using it, so I really didn't care. But then when it was time for me to put it out for others to use, I literally started a 3rd repo and rewrote the whole thing from scratch so that it was in a state that people could actually use it and I would be confident in the safety of the product. Code that you vibe code, you should be more than okay with throwing away entirely because it's disposable. That's the point. It's also important to consider security. Watch out for secrets, things like passwords and API keys. There's always been a problem with people leaking their API keys and things, but it's getting worse now more than ever. If you don't know what an API key is, I don't know how the hell you stumbled into this video. Be careful about what you build, please. Data privacy is also a really big concern. It's also important to be a good network citizen. Anything that makes requests out to other platforms could increase load as well as cost on those services. Cloud artifacts apparently keep you from making requests out. That's a cool thing to see. It's very easy to accidentally screw over someone else if you're building a tool on top of their tool and you hit some endpoint that the AI finds. I've definitely caused some damage to SoundCloud with hitting APIs you're not supposed to, so I know that feeling. And of course, is your money on the line? Seen horror stories about people who vibe coded a feature against some API without a billing limit and racked up thousands of dollars in charges. Be very careful about using vibe coding against anything that's charged based on usage. Fully agree. Simon has a section on how do we make vibe coding better. Links in the description if you want to read this. All of his posts are great, but I highly recommend these ones. Wrap it up with go forth and vibe code. I agree with the sentiment here too. Simon says people should not feel discouraged, and I totally agree. Vibe coding is really cool, both for figuring out what these tools are capable of and unlocking the ability in your brain to throw together something you wouldn't have bothered with before. A project that might have taken 3 to 4 days and not been that useful before can now be done in 1 to 2 hours. It might be prettier looking in some ways. It might be less functional in others. It might be code you never want to touch again. It might use a framework you don't even like. But you can vibe code out something useful to you hilariously quickly. And through that, you get to see so much of the capabilities of these tools, of these models, of these agents and quotes and the things that they call. You can learn a lot about both how powerful AI is, and more importantly, you can rethink when it makes sense to spin up a real project with developers versus a quick little thing on the side. There's a lot you can learn from and a lot you can change about how you build, regardless of how experienced you are. Vibe coding is a useful thing to learn for most engineers. And I have been very surprised at my willingness to vibe code since I took a similar stance. I wouldn't have done things like the clonathon if it wasn't for vibe coding. Not because I think people should vibe code their T3 chat clone, but because the clonathon submission portal and all of that was annoying to build, and I was able to vibe code out the starting point very easily. And there's a lot of these types of projects that I previously would have put on the backlog and never gotten to that suddenly make much more sense. So if you are scared of vibe coding, if you hate vibe coding, if you think the term should be used for all these other things, I'd recommend sitting down and actually trying it the way that Simon and Carpathy and now myself describe it. Because while it is not the right way to build real production enterprise software, it is certainly a good way to throw something together that otherwise might not exist at all. Let me know what you guys think. And until next time, keep vibing.